idea was just that, like any kind of investment strategy, we want to diversify our risk. We want to diversify.
In a world where universities stick to tradition, one institution is doing something completely different. Today we're talking with Chad Thevenot, the president of the University of Austin, a brand new university that's putting Bitcoin in their endowment. That's right. While Harvard and Yale continue with their old investment strategies, the University of Austin is embracing the future of money. The University of Austin, or UATX, launched just 3 years ago with a mission to bring back free thinking and open dialogue to higher education. Under Chad Thevenot's leadership, they're not just talking about innovation, they're actually doing it. From their teaching methods to their investment strategy, they're rethinking everything about how a university should work. In this episode from the TFTC podcast, we dive into why a university would put Bitcoin in their endowment, how traditional universities are secretly reaching out to UATX for guidance, and why decentralization might be the key to fixing higher education. If you want to hear the full conversation, you can find a link to the complete episode of the TFTC podcast in the description below. And if you enjoy this kind of content, hit the like button and subscribe to stay updated on more conversations about Bitcoin, education, and the future of finance. When I first started working at 1031, I quickly learned how important endowments are for universities. As an investor in Bitcoin companies, I see both sides of this, like how traditional institutions manage money and how Bitcoin is changing the financial landscape. Most universities stick to their old ways with traditional investments like stocks and bonds, following frameworks that haven't changed much in the last 100 years. It's pretty wild when you think about how much the world has changed, yet these massive endowments haven't adapted. That's what makes the University of Austin so interesting. They're completely rethinking the traditional endowment model by adding Bitcoin to their investment strategy. Let's hear Chad explain why they made this decision.
So some level of endowment's good, right? You need, and I think want to, as a university, to create endowed funds for things like scholarships, right? So you have that money in perpetuity to be able to offer scholarships to students in need or for merit. You want things like endowed chairs if you want to be able to attract top-notch intellectuals and scholars. It's very helpful if there's money in the bank where you're drawing 5% roughly a year to pay for that chair. And so that individual in the university knows there's stability, right? So that's a good version of the endowment. So the idea was just that, like any kind of investment strategy, we want to diversify our risk. We want to diversify.
As describing here is really important, and it hits close to home for me because at 1031, we spend a lot of time thinking about how Bitcoin can improve existing financial systems. Universities need a lot of money saved up to run properly. They use the interest and returns from their endowment to pay for things year after year. Think of it like a fruit tree. You don't cut down the tree, you just harvest the fruit each season. This model has worked for centuries, but it's also limited by traditional investment options. When a university like UATX looks at Bitcoin's performance over the last 5 years and decides to include it in their endowment, they're doing something truly revolutionary. Most traditional universities wouldn't even consider this. They're too worried about what their boards or donors might think, but that's exactly what makes UATX different. They're willing to think differently about everything, including how to build financial security for their institution. This decision shows they understand that the financial world is changing, and they're positioning themselves to benefit from that change rather than resist it. Now, putting Bitcoin in a university endowment isn't just about trying to make money. That's what makes this story so interesting. There's actually a deeper connection between what Bitcoin stands for and what the University of Austin is trying to accomplish. I've been in the Bitcoin world for a long time, and I've seen how its core values align with institutions that value freedom and independent thinking. What you're about to hear is Chad explaining how these philosophical connections influenced their decision to include Bitcoin in their endowment. It's a perspective that really shows how Bitcoin is about much more than just money.
The more ideological part, if you will, or philosophical part, is that we believe what it stands for. In our mind, it stands for free speech, free expression, Well, that's what we're all about. That's our DNA. So, we're like spiritually, we're this close to Bitcoin, right? In the Bitcoin community, we get it, right? We get what it means to kind of want a way out of the madness of an institution and towards some freedom and control. And so, there's that kind of community connection, and we're seeing this. Like so many of our supporters, our students, they're all interested in Bitcoin.
Yeah. Well, it was this your personal journey to Bitcoin. Did you understand Bitcoin before you made the decision,
No,
or was it something you came to understand as?
I mean, I have some Bitcoin. I've had it for a number of years, but I was more like, it was a whim, whatever, a few years ago, and that was the end of it. I never got into it personally in terms of really understanding it until more recently. I blame Joe Kelly for this. He was telling me more about it, and I was listening, and Jonathan was talking with me as well. And then I was like, wow, this really is important. I need to pay more attention. Because I'm a really curious person, so everything interests me, which is kind of a problem in the sense that all of a sudden I can deep dive into, literature or music or whatever and just go.
What really stands out to me here is how Chad connects Bitcoin's values to the university's mission. Both are about breaking away from traditional systems that aren't working anymore. The University of Austin wants to create a new model for higher education, just like Bitcoin creates a new model for money. This parallel runs deeper than most people realize. In both cases, you're looking at systems that have become too centralized, too controlled by a small group of powerful institutions. It's also fascinating to hear Chad's personal journey with Bitcoin. Like many people, he started by just buying a little bit without thinking too much about it. But once he took the time to really understand what Bitcoin is about, he saw how it connected to bigger ideas about freedom and independence. This is something we see all the time in the Bitcoin community. People start by thinking it's just digital money, but end up discovering it's much more than that. His story reflects what many institutional leaders go through. They start skeptical, but once they understand Bitcoin's deeper implications, they see how it aligns with their own values and mission. One of the most powerful ideas in both Bitcoin and education is decentralization, the idea that systems work better when power is spread out rather than concentrated in one place. This next part of our conversation really gets to the heart of why Bitcoin and what the University of Austin are doing are so similar. When you understand this connection, you start to see why it makes so much sense for a university focused on independent thinking to embrace Bitcoin, and listen to how this connection came up in our conversation. We're like, what you're doing at UATX is just like a fractal movement of that, like you're doing at the university level. And that's obviously near and dear to our heart in the Bitcoin community, because Bitcoin is this distributed system, and one of our core beliefs, or one of my core beliefs as a Bitcoiner, is that this distributed, robust system is what we should be building on top of. And you need, whether it's a robust monetary system, a robust republic of states with their own individual ways of doing things, or a robust distributed university system with a plethora of different models and ideas. This is how systems should organize, is in this distributed fashion.
Exactly. And that's been the magic of the Constitution, for example, is that distribution of power across the branches and so on between the states and the federal government. I mean, the first thing that somebody who cares about a free and open and prosperity, the first thing you should really have, I think, is a general intellectual kind of habit, is skepticism, not cynicism, but skepticism, right? And particularly skepticism about centralization of power, wherever it might be, whether that's corporate power, the Federal Reserve, the federal government, whatever. The nature of power is, as it gets more centralized, it gets more corrupt.
Of our conversation, it really gets to the heart of why Bitcoin and what the University of Austin is doing are so similar. Both are trying to build systems that work better by spreading out power instead of concentrating it. Think about how our current banking system works. A small group of people at the Federal Reserve make decisions that affect everyone's money. Bitcoin takes that power and spreads it across a network of people all around the world. The University of Austin is trying to do something similar with education, creating a new model that isn't controlled by the same small group of institutions that have dominated higher education for so long. When Chad talks about skepticism towards centralized power, he's touching on something that's fundamental to both Bitcoin and education reform. History has shown us time and time again that when too much power gets concentrated in one place, whether it's in government, banking, or education, it usually leads to corruption and stagnation. That's why this idea of distributed systems is so important. It's not just about making things more efficient. It's about creating systems that are more resistant to corruption and more responsive to the needs of the people they serve. We've just seen how the University of Austin is bringing Bitcoin and higher education together in ways that could change both industries forever. What do you think? Will other universities follow UATX's lead and start putting Bitcoin